Rigel O'Sullivan was fairly certain that if hell existed, it was in this cramped, recycled-air excuse for a spaceport terminal. The interplanetary highway was clogged with every kind of spacecraft imaginable, from gleaming corporate star yachts to battered freighters that looked like they were held together with chewing gum and spite. Everyone had places to be, except Rigel, who was stuck here trying to negotiate peace between two factions who'd been at each other's throats longer than most of these travelers had been alive. The terminal's PA system crackled to life, spitting out an unintelligible announcement about delayed departures. Rigel could barely hear it over the cacophony of alien languages and the general clamor of people who had given up on personal space the moment they set foot in this interstellar bazaar. He shifted his weight, hoping to relieve the pressure on his sore feet without stepping on someone's tentacle. "You look like someone who's about to make a terrible decision," a voice drawled beside him. Rigel turned to see a figure lounging against the wall, a human with a face like he'd seen too many early mornings. The name tag on his uniform read Jax. "I'll take that as a compliment," Rigel replied, adjusting his diplomat badge like it was an ancient talisman that would ward off the insanity of the place. "Heard you're here to babysit the Varkniks and their merry band of joyless aliens," Jax continued, his tone so dry it could have started a brush fire. "Word is sarcasm's off the table. Apparently it's a dangerous human weapon." "Great," Rigel muttered, rolling his eyes. "That's like asking a fish not to swim." Jack snorted, adjusting his cap. "Yeah, and I'm guessing they don't want you using irony as a blunt instrument either." "Guess I'll have to communicate with interpretive dance," Rigel grumbled, glancing over at the massive, armored figure approaching, the Varknik's ambassador, who moved with the grace of a tank rolling downhill. Varkniks, looking like a walking chest of drawers with legs, stopped in front of Rigel. "Human diplomat O'Sullivan," it intoned, each syllable like a rock slide, "we commence peace talks in 1 hour. Your usual violative manner of speech is forbidden." "Violative? You mean effective," Rigel corrected with a mock salute. "But sure, I'll play nice." The Varkniks gave him a look that suggested it was considering whether he'd be tastier roasted or fried. "We shall see if humans can converse without their usual excesses." Rigel forced a smile, the kind that showed too many teeth. "I promise to be as dull as possible." As the Varkniks lumbered away, Jax clapped Rigel on the shoulder. "Good luck, pal. You've got all the charm of a brick in a glass shop." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Rigel replied, watching the crowd swallow up the alien ambassador. The hum of the spaceport seemed to amplify his thoughts as he considered the task ahead. Negotiating peace without sarcasm felt like trying to sew with no needle. But then, Rigel had always thrived on impossible odds, like growing up in a family of overachievers, where his greatest accomplishment was a mediocre degree in xenodiplomacy. He headed to the designated negotiation chamber, which was as welcoming as a dentist's waiting room. Metal walls, hard chairs, and a complete lack of anything resembling comfort. The kind of place designed to keep you on your toes, or at least make sure you didn't fall asleep on the job. The other representatives were already there, sitting in uncomfortable silence. The room was a mosaic of skins, scales, and fur, with expressions ranging from "I hate this" to "when will this end?" Rigel took his seat, folding himself into the chair with all the enthusiasm of a man condemned. The Varknik's ambassador stared at him, its eyes unblinking. "We commence with the agenda." "Sure," Rigel said, leaning back as much as the rigid chair would allow. "Let's get this freak show started." The Varkniks raised an appendage, and the lights dimmed, highlighting a holo display that flickered with strategic plans and territorial maps. "We require human cooperation in dismantling offensive sarcasm strategies." "Oh, right, those," Rigel said, trying not to roll his eyes. "You caught us. We were planning on sarcastically invading you next Tuesday." "Humor is not constructive," the Varkniks replied, its voice like ground glass. "Guess that depends on your definition of constructive," Rigel muttered under his breath. The meeting dragged on, a blur of accusations, counter-accusations, and the occasional attempt at diplomacy. Rigel realized quickly that most of the aliens thought compromise was a dirty word. It was like negotiation limbo. How low could he go without getting crushed by the weight of everyone's expectations? As the session droned on, Rigel's attention drifted. He couldn't help but notice the intricacies of alien facial expressions, or lack thereof. The Varkniks, for instance, had a face that could give a slab of granite a run for its money. The others weren't much better. Most of them looked like they'd only gotten the memo about faces this morning. Finally, Rigel couldn't take it anymore. "Look," he said, cutting through the latest round of accusations, "how about we all just agree that everyone thinks everyone else is an idiot and go from there?" The room fell silent, the various alien delegates turning to look at him. The Varkniks' eyes narrowed. "Your suggestion is unorthodox. That's diplomatic code for screwed, right?" Rigel said, stifling a laugh. One of the other alien diplomats, a creature that looked like a cross between a cactus and a disgruntled school teacher, spoke up. "We must agree on terms that ensure peace and mutual respect." Mutual respect. In this room, Rigel couldn't help but chuckle. "That's the funniest thing I've heard all day." The Varkniks made a low growling sound that might have been a sigh. "We shall break for now. Reconvene in 1 hour." As the delegates filed out, Rigel stayed behind, slumping in his chair. This was a mess wrapped in a disaster coated with a veneer of catastrophe, and that was on a good day. He closed his eyes, listening to the echoing emptiness of the room. "You still alive, O'Sullivan?" Jax's voice interrupted his reverie. "Barely," Rigel replied, opening his eyes to see Jax standing in the doorway. "If I die, tell my family I died doing what I love, rolling my eyes at bureaucrats." Jax grinned, tossing him a protein bar. "Eat something. Can't save the galaxy on an empty stomach." Rigel unwrapped the bar, taking a bite that tasted like compressed cardboard. "You're a real hero, Jax. What can I say? I'm the gift that keeps on giving." Jax leaned against the wall, watching Rigel with a mix of amusement and pity. "So what's the plan?" "Plan," Rigel shrugged. "Keep talking until someone breaks down in tears or throws a punch." "Solid plan," Jax said with a nod. "Just remember they're not allowed to punch you. That's the beauty of diplomacy." "Yeah, they just stab you in the back when you're not looking," Rigel replied, finishing off the bar with a grimace. "Guess you better watch your back then, huh?" Jax straightened up, giving Rigel a mock salute before heading out. Rigel sat there a moment longer, mulling over his options. He could try to play by their rules, tone down the sarcasm, and pretend he was something other than what he was. Or he could double down, use his natural talent to navigate the minefield they'd laid out for him. The hour passed faster than a comet on a caffeine high, and soon enough the delegates were back in their seats, ready for round 2. Rigel took a deep breath, steeling himself for more of the cosmic circus. "We resume," the Varkniks announced, like a judge about to pass sentence. "Right," Rigel said, leaning forward with his best poker face. "Let's get this party started again." In the end, it was always about balance. Balance between honesty and diplomacy, between sarcasm and sincerity, between wanting to strangle someone and actually doing it. Rigel was walking the tightrope of interstellar diplomacy, and all he could do was hope not to fall off. Then again, if he did, at least he might land on someone who deserved it. Rigel O'Sullivan had always thought of sarcasm as his first language and diplomacy as a very distant second. Yet here he was, asked to navigate the choppy waters of interstellar negotiation, without the one tool he truly excelled at wielding. It was like asking a fish to breathe without water or a bureaucrat to give a straight answer. He'd been sitting in a corner of the spaceport bar, nursing a cocktail that tasted like someone had misunderstood the concept of flavor, when he first heard the whispers. A group of humans at the next table were speaking in low voices, and from what Rigel could catch, they weren't discussing the latest interstellar sports scores. "Did you hear about Clint Varick?" one of them said, a tall woman with a shock of blue hair and a voice that could cut glass. Yeah, another answered, a wiry man with a nervous twitch in his eye. He's talking about sticking it to the Varkniks, says we should use sarcasm as a weapon. Ridgel choked on his drink, sputtering as the irony, oh, the irony, hit him like a freight train. Sarcasm as a weapon was precisely what he'd been forbidden to wield, and now someone wanted to use it to start a rebellion. Well, wasn't that a kick in the diplomatic pants? He leaned back, pretending to be engrossed in the flickering holo news, but his ears were tuned to the conversation. Apparently, Clint Varick was some kind of charismatic ringleader, gathering like-minded humans who were fed up with the Varkniks' rules. They wanted to hit back in the only way they knew how, by making fun of their oppressors until they either changed their minds or keeled over from confusion. The absurdity of the situation was almost too much. Ridgel imagined a group of humans standing in front of a Varkniks delegation, delivering sarcastic one-liners until the aliens had no choice but to capitulate. It shouldn't have been funny, but it was. Gloriously, ridiculously funny. And then it struck him. Maybe this was the kind of crazy, outside-the-box thinking that could actually make a difference. The Varkniks weren't used to human humor. Hell, they weren't used to any humor at all. Maybe sarcasm could be a weapon, after all, a way to throw a wrench into the well-oiled machinery of Varkniks authority. His thoughts were interrupted as Jack slid into the seat across from him. You look like someone who just discovered the meaning of life or a particularly good joke. Maybe both, Ridgel said, glancing at the other table to ensure he wasn't being too obvious about eavesdropping. Jax followed his gaze and grinned. Ah, the Varick revolutionaries. They're like a bad case of lice, hard to get rid of and incredibly annoying. Annoying or not, they might actually have a point, Ridgel replied, keeping his voice low. Sarcasm as a form of resistance. Who would have thought? Certainly not the Varkniks, Jack snorted. But then thinking isn't their strong suit. Ridgel chuckled, leaning forward. You think they could pull it off? Jack shrugged. Depends. If they manage to keep it under wraps long enough to organize something meaningful, maybe. But you know how humans are. Subtlety's not exactly in the top 10 of our skill sets. True, Ridgel admitted. But it might be worth watching. Worst case, it'll be good for a laugh. And best case? Jax asked, his eyes glinting with mischief. Best case, we win the war with a punchline, Ridgel replied, clinking his glass against Jax's. The next few days were a whirlwind of suppressed sarcasm and forced politeness. Ridgel had to bite his tongue so many times he was surprised he hadn't developed a permanent lisp. But the whispers about Clint Varick and his rebellion kept reaching his ears, like a tantalizing promise of chaos just waiting to be unleashed. He found himself in the negotiation chamber again, the same uncomfortable chairs and the same stone-faced delegates. The Varkniks ambassador was droning on about the importance of mutual respect, a topic as alien to the Varkniks as a sense of humor. Ridgel zoned out, his mind wandering to the idea of a sarcastic rebellion. Maybe it was the madness of it all that appealed to him. Or perhaps it was the simple fact that it offered a glimmer of hope, however absurd, in the otherwise bleak landscape of diplomacy. After the session, Ridgel lingered, pretending to study the agenda while the other delegates filed out. He was waiting for Jax, who had promised to introduce him to someone with a finger on the pulse of the rebellion. "You're not planning on sleeping here, are you?" Jax asked, finally showing up with his usual swagger. "Didn't want to miss my chance to meet your mysterious contact," Ridgel replied, standing and stretching his legs. "Well, come on then, and try not to use your dangerous humor weapon on this one," Jax teased as they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the spaceport. They arrived at a nondescript door, which Jax unlocked with a series of rapid taps on a keypad. Inside was a room that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and desperation. Wires snaked across the floor, and a bank of monitors flickered with images of various locations within the spaceport. In the center of the chaos stood Clint Varick, exactly as Ridgel had imagined him, tall, charismatic, and radiating a kind of manic energy that was both infectious and slightly terrifying. "So, you're the famous diplomat," Clint said, looking Rigel up and down like he was assessing a piece of machinery with unknown functions. "Famous? I wish," Rigel replied, offering a handshake. "I'm just the guy they send in when everyone else has given up." "Good enough for me," Clint said, flashing a grin that was equal parts charm and challenge. "I hear you're interested in what we're doing." "More than interested," Rigel admitted. "I think you might actually be on to something." Clint's eyes gleamed. "Then you're just the kind of ally we need." "The Varkniks think they have us under their thumb, but they haven't counted on a little thing called human ingenuity. Or insanity," Jax added helpfully. "Same difference," Clint said with a shrug. "The point is, we're going to hit them where it hurts, right in their lack of a sense of humor." Rigel couldn't help but smile at the audacity of it all. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "We're organizing a series of events," Clint explained, gesturing to the monitors. "Flash mobs, viral messages, anything that gets the message across without turning us into martyrs." "Sounds risky," Rigel said, not bothering to hide the skepticism in his voice. "Everything worth doing usually is," Clint replied. "But if we can make them rethink their assumptions about us, even for a moment, it might be enough." Rigel nodded, the wheels in his mind turning. It was a long shot, but sometimes long shots were all you had. "Count me in." "I might not be able to wield sarcasm in the negotiation room, but out here, I think I can be of some help." "Glad to have you aboard," Clint said, slapping Rigel on the back hard enough to make him wince. "We'll make a rebel of you yet." As they discussed plans and tactics, Rigel felt a sense of camaraderie and purpose that had been missing from his diplomatic endeavors. Here was a group of people who understood the power of words, not just as tools of negotiation, but as weapons of defiance. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. The conversation eventually wound down, and Rigel found himself heading back to his quarters with Jax. The corridors were quiet, save for the distant hum of the spaceport's life support systems. "So what do you really think?" Jax asked, his voice low. "I think it's crazy," Rigel replied honestly, "but I also think it might just work." "Crazy is what humans do best," Jax said with a chuckle. "And if it does work, it'll be one hell of a story." Rigel smiled, feeling a surge of optimism, or something like it, for the first time in what felt like forever. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off, and if they didn't, well, at least they'd go down swinging. As they reached Rigel's quarters, Jax clapped him on the shoulder. "Get some rest, diplomat. You've got a big day of rebellion and negotiations ahead." "Yeah," Rigel said, opening the door and stepping inside. Just another day at the office. He lay down on his bunk, staring up at the ceiling as he considered the enormity of what they were about to attempt. The Varkniks were relentless, and they held all the cards. But humans had always thrived on impossible odds. As he drifted off to sleep, Rigel couldn't help but think about how he'd ended up here, caught between his duty and his desire to make a difference. Maybe this wasn't the path he would have chosen, but it was the one he was on. And for better or worse, he was going to see it through. The next morning, Rigel woke to the sound of his communicator buzzing insistently. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and glanced at the message. Clint had sent him a list of tasks and contacts, outlining the next steps in their plan. He got up, feeling the weight of the day's responsibilities settling on his shoulders. But instead of dread, he felt a strange sense of anticipation. This was different. This was something he could believe in, an absurd, glorious rebellion against the odds. As he prepared to meet with the others, Rigel caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. There was a determination there, lurking behind the weary lines and sarcastic smirk. Maybe this was his chance to prove that words could be more than just empty promises. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. He stepped out into the corridor, ready to face whatever the day would bring. It was time to put his money where his mouth was, sarcasm and all. Rigel found himself sitting at the edge of his bunk the next morning, sipping something that was probably sold to him as coffee, but tasted more like recycled engine oil. He listened to the hurried shuffle through the corridors outside, the spaceport's heartbeat drumming against the walls. It was going to be one of those days, the kind that ended with bruised egos and broken dreams, or maybe a surprising victory if luck was feeling particularly generous. Clint's messages had come in overnight, buzzing his communicator like a needy ex. Each beep was a reminder of the growing rebellion, a network of coded messages and whispered sarcasm that was starting to spread like a particularly resilient virus. Rigel couldn't help but admire the audacity of it all. It was like trying to start a fire with wet matches, stupid, reckless, and somehow brilliant. He fished out his communicator and flicked through the messages. Each one was layered with irony and a healthy dose of snark. It was as if Clint was challenging the universe to find them out, betting on the universe being as inattentive as its previous track record suggested. One message caught his attention, a proposal for a sarcasm bomb, whatever that was. Rigel imagined an explosion of poorly timed jokes and eye rolls sweeping across the Varkniks ranks, leaving confusion and mild irritation in its wake. He chuckled at the image. If the Varkniks were as humorless as they seemed, this might actually work. His train of thought was derailed by a knock at the door. Jax leaned in, wearing a grin that suggested he'd either just stolen the spaceport's entire supply of chocolate or was about to suggest something equally reckless. "Ready for round two?" Jax asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Clint's got a new plan." "Does it involve sarcasm and bad puns?" Rigel asked, setting his mug aside. "Of course," Jax replied, plopping down on the bunk opposite him. "But this time we're aiming for the big league's Holo News." Rigel raised an eyebrow. "The Holo News? You mean the same system that's got more fail-safes than a paranoid android?" "That's the one," Jax confirmed, eyes alight with mischief. "Clint's got a guy on the inside, a real wizard with tech." "Wizard? Please tell me he doesn't wear a pointy hat," Rigel deadpanned. "More of a beanie, actually," Jax replied with a smirk. "But the plan's solid. We hijack the feed, broadcast a few choice messages, and sit back as the Varkniks try to figure out what the hell just happened. Because nothing says organized rebellion like a prank on live television," Rigel mused. "All right, I'm in. But if this goes sideways, I'm throwing you under the bus." "Deal," Jax said with a laugh. "Let's get to it." They made their way through the labyrinth of the spaceport, dodging the occasional maintenance droid that seemed determined to polish everything to a blinding shine. The corridors were alive with activity, people moving with the kind of grim determination that suggested they'd rather be anywhere but here. They slipped into a side room, where Clint stood with a group of conspirators. The tall woman with blue hair was there, looking as sharp as her voice, and the wiry man with the nervous twitch was fiddling with a device that resembled a cross between a toaster and a death ray. "Ah, our diplomatic friend," Clint greeted, turning to Rigel with a grin. "Glad you could join us." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Rigel replied, glancing at the contraption on the table. "So what's the plan? We hijack the Holo News feed," Clint explained, gesturing to the wiry man who looked up with a twitchy grin. "Meet Deke, our resident tech genius." "Genius is a bit of a stretch," Deke said, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "But I do all right." "Modesty doesn't suit you, Deke," the tall woman interjected, her voice like a sharpened blade. "Just show him what you've got." Deke nodded, fiddling with the device before a holographic display flickered to life, showing the familiar sight of the spaceport's main concourse. "I've rigged this to tap into the Holo News network. We can broadcast whatever we want, whenever we want." "And what do we want to broadcast, exactly?" Rigel asked, crossing his arms as he studied the setup. "A simple message," Clint replied, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "We want to remind the Varkniks that we're still here, still human, and still a royal pain in the ass." "And you think sarcasm is going to do that?" Rigel asked, raising an eyebrow. "More than sarcasm," Clint assured him. "Irony, humor, a bit of truth. Everything they can't process." Plus, it helps that they can't filter it through their usual channels, Deke added, tapping the side of the device. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late. And if it doesn't work, Rigel asked, playing devil's advocate. Then we've at least annoyed them, Jax chimed in. And that's something. Rigel sighed, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. All right, let's do it. But if we all end up on a Varknick's wanted list, I'm blaming you, Clint. Blame away, Clint said with a laugh. Now let's give them a show they won't forget. The room buzzed with excitement as they prepared the broadcast. Rigel felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration, like a gambler placing his last bet. It was reckless, it was insane, and it was their best shot at making a dent in the Varknick's armor. As Deke punched in the final codes, the Holo News feed blinked and stuttered, then cut to a pre-recorded message. Clint's face appeared, larger than life, flashing a grin that practically dared the universe to try and stop him. Greetings, citizens of the galaxy, Clint began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. We're here to remind you that despite the Varknick's best efforts, the human spirit is as indomitable as ever. The message continued, a masterclass in verbal irony and dark humor. It was a rallying cry wrapped in sarcasm, designed to slip past the Varknick's defenses and plant a seed of doubt. As the broadcast ended, the room erupted into cheers and high fives. Rigel watched the chaos, caught somewhere between admiration and disbelief. This was either the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning, and he wasn't quite sure which he preferred. Well, that was something, Jax said, clapping Rigel on the back. Think they'll get the message? They'll get something, Rigel replied, shaking his head. Whether they understand it is another question. We'll just have to wait and see, Clint said, looking around the room with a satisfied grin. But either way, they know we're here now. Rigel nodded, feeling the weight of their actions settle on his shoulders. They just declared open defiance against the Varknick's, and there was no going back. But for the first time, it felt like they were doing more than just surviving. They were fighting in their own twisted, sarcastic way. As the group dispersed, Rigel lingered, watching the monitors flicker back to their regular programming. The Varknick's wouldn't take this lying down. They'd respond, and it wouldn't be pretty. But that was a problem for another day. Hey, don't look so grim, Jax said, nudging him as they left the room. This is what you wanted, right? A chance to make a difference. Yeah, Rigel admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. But I just hope it's the right kind of difference. It will be, Jax assured him. Or at the very least, it'll be an interesting ride. Together, they made their way back to the main concourse, where life continued as if they hadn't just thrown a wrench into the works. People bustled about, oblivious to the small revolution taking place around them. Rigel watched them pass, feeling a strange sense of kinship. They were all caught up in something bigger than themselves, just trying to get by. Maybe, just maybe, this rebellion could give them something to believe in, something beyond the monotony and despair of everyday life under the Varknick's rule. As they reached the edge of the concourse, Rigel paused, glancing back at Jax. You know, for a plan based mostly on sarcasm, this might actually work. Jax grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. Told you, Rigel, never underestimate the power of human snark. And with that, they plunged back into the heart of the spaceport, ready to face whatever came next. It was a new day, a new fight, and Rigel was ready to see it through to the bitter end or the gloriously sarcastic victory, whichever came first. The euphoria from their recent Holo News prank barely had time to settle into a smug glaze before the universe decided to remind Rigel and his merry band of misfits that no good rebellion goes unpunished. It was like they'd cracked open a particularly vicious cosmic joke book and forgotten to read the punchline, the part where the Varknick's took things personally, and in space, personal was never good. The crackdown came with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The spaceport PA system, usually reserved for announcing yet another delay in departures, blared with a tone that screamed "We mean business," which was impressive considering it was emanating from a machine. Attention, citizens. The Varkniks coalition has implemented advanced measures to ensure compliance. All communications will be monitored. Any deviation from standard emotional registers will lead to immediate action. Rigel couldn't help but snort at the absurdity. The Varkniks, with all their technology, still couldn't figure out sarcasm unless they coded it into an algorithm. But the humor was short-lived. The message wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And as much as he loved a good sarcastic quip, Rigel preferred his skin unscorched. Jax, ever the optimist, joined Rigel at the spaceport bar, a place that smelled like desperation steeped in cheap alcohol, a scent only slightly less appealing than the Varkniks' newest plans. "Well, love a good challenge, don't you?" Jax said, grinning like a cat that had only just realized it was in a room full of rocking chairs. "I was thinking more along the lines of an extended vacation." "But hey, who doesn't like living under the threat of existential annihilation?" Rigel replied, swirling the contents of his glass like it might hold the answers to life, the universe, and everything else they'd screwed up. As if on cue, the tall woman with blue hair, whose voice could cut glass, plonked herself on the stool next to them. Her name was Ayla, though Rigel had yet to decide if it suited someone who could turn a compliment into a weapon. "You two enjoying your last moments of freedom?" Ayla asked, her words sharp enough to draw blood. "Freedom's overrated," Jax said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Give me a good fight any day," spoken like someone who hasn't had to clean up the aftermath, Rigel muttered, taking a sip. Enter Deke, their tech wizard with the nervous disposition of a caffeinated squirt. He shuffled over, eyes darting around like he expected the walls to develop ears and start taking notes. "It's bad," he said, unnecessarily stating the obvious. "They've got some new tech, something that can detect sarcasm." Jax blinked, genuinely impressed. "Well, look at that. Maybe they are finally learning." "Learning's a strong word," Rigel interjected. "Parroting what they don't understand is more their style." But Deke wasn't finished. "They're rounding people up. Anyone they suspect of, having a personality." Ayla's expression darkened, though with her usual flair for understatement. "So they're just going after everyone." "Pretty much," Deke confirmed, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the bar top as if trying to keep pace with his racing thoughts. The group absorbed this information with the kind of resigned acceptance that comes when you realize you're in a sinking ship and all the lifeboats are made of paper. Rigel's mind whirred, already trying to piece together some form of a plan that didn't end with everyone either incarcerated or vaporized. "That's not all," Deke continued, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Clint's been taken." The words landed like a punch to the gut, and for a moment Rigel could only gape at Deke. The smug grin that usually adorned Clint's face, daring the universe to strike him down, was gone. And without Clint leading the charge with his sharp wit and sharper words, the rebellion felt like a ship without its captain, or worse, a joke without its punchline. "Guess we're up," Jax said, ever the reckless optimist. "Time to break some rules." "Breaking rules is easy," Ayla replied, her smile more like a grimace. "Surviving the consequences. That's the hard part." Rigel nodded, already feeling the weight of their next move pressing down on him. "We need to get our hands on Clint's message decoder. It's the only way to keep this thing going." "Isn't that in the Varkniks' headquarters? The place crawling with more security than a paranoid monarch's treasure vault?" Deke asked, his nervous twitch turning into a full-blown dance routine. "Exactly," Rigel said, feeling a reckless excitement bubbling to the surface. "We'll need a distraction. Something big, and by big you mean stupidly dangerous," Jax said, rubbing his hands together with glee. "Of course," Rigel replied, "it's the only kind we know." Their plans were rapidly taking the shape of a poorly thought-out suicide mission, a hallmark of any rebellion worth its salt. With the Varkniks deploying technology to detect sarcasm, they needed to be smarter and, ironically, less sarcastic. Maybe they'd finally get to see if sincerity could work as a weapon. "We'll need to hit them where it hurts," Ayla said, already planning. "Right in their bureaucratic heart," Rigel agreed, finishing his drink and standing. Time to give them something they can't ignore. The spaceport bustled with the kind of desperate energy that comes when everyone knows something is about to happen, but no one has the slightest clue what. Rigel led the way through the throng, the chaos a welcome cover for their movements. It was time to tip the balance back in their favor, or at least give it a good shove, and pretend they meant to do that all along. The Varkniks' headquarters loomed ahead, a monolithic structure as uninviting as a dentist's chair. Rigel, Jax, Ayla, and Deke huddled in an alleyway, making final preparations. Deke's fingers danced over his handheld device, a cobbled-together piece of tech that was as likely to explode as it was to function. "Once we're in," Rigel said, addressing the group in a low voice, "we grab the decoder and get out." "No heroics. Define heroics," Jax said, flashing a grin sharp enough to cut through steel. "Anything that ends with us being hailed as martyrs," Rigel replied, casting a sidelong glance at the grinning idiot. "Gotcha. No dying today," Jax confirmed, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. Ayla pulled out a small, unassuming device and handed it to Rigel. "This'll disrupt their internal comms. 5 minutes tops. After that, we're on our own. 5 minutes to break into the most secure building on the station, steal a highly classified device and escape undetected," Rigel said, shaking his head. "I've had hangovers that lasted longer. Let me guess," Deke piped up. "That's what you call a challenge, something like that," Rigel said with a wry grin. "All right, let's move." They slipped through the shadows, approaching the entrance with all the stealth of a group that knew they were seriously out of their depth. Each step brought them closer to the lion's den, and yet, for all the odds stacked against them, there was a sense of purpose, a defiant flame that refused to be snuffed out. Outside the entrance, Rigel activated the comms disruptor, the device letting out a soft whir before falling silent. 5 minutes, Ayla reminded them, her eyes scanning the building's exterior. With a nod, Rigel led the charge, the door sliding open with a reluctant hiss as if it knew they didn't belong. Inside, the stark interior of the Varkniks' headquarters was a cold contrast to the bustling life outside. Everything was smooth, sterile, and just a bit too perfect, like a facade hiding a rotten core. They moved quickly, each minute slipping by with an urgency that bordered on panic. They zigzagged through the corridors, dodging patrols and slipping past security checkpoints with a mixture of luck and sheer audacity. Finally, they reached the room where Clint's decoder was kept, a nondescript chamber lined with a series of control panels and blinking screens. It was exactly the kind of place that screamed important, and therefore, exactly where they needed to be. Jax immediately set to work dismantling the security field, his hands a blur of movement as he bypassed the system. Almost there, he muttered, focused entirely on his task. Rigel kept watch, heart pounding as he counted down the seconds. They were cutting it close, too close. A feeling of inevitability settled over him like a shroud, but he shook it off. Now wasn't the time for doubt. With a triumphant click, Jax disconnected the final lock and the decoder was theirs. It was smaller than Rigel had expected, almost disappointingly so. For all the trouble it had caused, it looked like nothing more than an oversized paperweight. "Got it," Jax said, flashing a victory sign. "Then let's go," Rigel replied, the urgency in his voice undeniable. They retraced their steps, moving with a speed that bordered on reckless. But as they reached the exit, their luck finally ran out. The comms disruptor had reached its limit, and the building roared to life with alarms. "Time to run," Ayla said, pushing them forward as the cacophony of blaring sirens echoed around them. The final stretch was a blur of movement and noise, each step bringing them closer to freedom and the inevitable consequences of their actions. Rigel's mind raced, already planning their next move even as they fought to escape the immediate danger. They burst from the building, the chaos of the spaceport rushing to meet them like an old friend. The crowd offered a welcome cover, allowing them to melt into the throng and vanish among the countless faces. Breathless, They regrouped in a nearby alley, hearts hammering as they processed their near escape. They'd done it. They'd pulled off the impossible, and for now they were safe. "We did it," Deke said, disbelief coloring his voice. "We actually did it." "Don't sound so surprised," Jack said with a laugh, though the tension in his shoulders belied his bravado. Ayla smiled, a rare expression that softened her sharp features. "One more step forward," she said, looking at Rigel with a nod of respect. Rigel returned the smile, feeling the weight of their actions settle over him. They'd struck a blow against the Varkniks, and while the battle was far from over, it was a start, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. "All right, what now?" Jax asked, eyes alight with the thrill of their success. "Now," Rigel said, clapping him on the shoulder, "we plan the next move. This fight's far from over." And with that they slipped back into the shadows, ready to face whatever came next. The stakes were higher than ever, but Rigel knew they wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. They were in this for the long haul, sarcasm and all. The spaceport bar smelled like a wet sock left to ferment in cheap vodka, which made it the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. Plus, the dim lighting did wonders for hiding despair, wrinkles, and questionable hygiene. Rigel sat with Jax, Ayla, and Deke at a round table sticky with spilled drinks and broken promises, working up the courage to take another sip of his drink. It was, after all, mostly paint thinner. Jax toyed with a napkin, folding and unfolding it with the kind of manic energy only a lunatic, or an optimist, could muster. "So what's the plan, fearless leader?" he asked, eyes dancing with reckless enthusiasm. Rigel sighed, wondering if he could get away with throttling Jax for an ire of peace. "The plan," he said, choosing his words like a careful diplomat who only knew swear words, "is to not get vaporized, imprisoned, or otherwise inconvenienced by the Varkniks." "That's hardly a plan," Ayla pointed out, her voice as sharp as her blue hair was blue. "That's wishful thinking dressed up in a fancy coat." "That's my specialty," Rigel replied, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Here's to hoping we don't all die in the next Ior." "Cheers," Deke muttered, his hand twitching dangerously close to his drink as though it might bite. He'd been jumpy ever since their little escapade at the Varkniks HQ. Understandable, given that paranoia was basically a luxury around here. Rigel leaned back, letting the chair creak under him like it was protesting its fate. "Here's the honest truth, folks. We're running on empty. No leader, no resources, and no clear shot at taking down the Varkniks without getting ourselves turned into cosmic debris." Jax, ever the optimist despite the universe's best efforts, grinned wide enough to count his fillings. "So, business as usual then." "Sure, if your idea of business involves dodging death like it's a stray laser shot," Rigel chuckled. "Thing is, Clint's gone, and someone needs to step up and fill those sarcastic shoes." "Any volunteers?" Ayla asked, her voice dripping with enough irony to rust her words. Silence greeted her, as if the very idea of leading was more terrifying than the Varkniks themselves. It was one thing to crack jokes from the sidelines, another entirely to stand in the spotlight with a target painted on your back. "I mean, I'd say Rigel should do it," Jack said, smirking, "but I'm not sure his sarcasm is up to Clint's level." "Thanks for the vote of no confidence," Rigel replied dryly. "But guess what? I'm the best you've got." Ayla raised an eyebrow, a move that somehow managed to convey skepticism, disbelief, and mild amusement all at once. "Really? You're volunteering?" "Volunteering is a strong word," Rigel admitted. "But we can't just sit here and let the Varkniks out-sarcasm us into oblivion. Might as well give it a shot before we start contemplating which corner of the galaxy to flee to." Deke nodded, though it seemed like his head was having an argument with his neck over whether nodding was a good idea. "I guess it's better than doing nothing." "Spoken like a man with truly rock-bottom expectations," Rigel quipped. "All right, let's get this rebellion back on track, or at least pretend like we know what we're doing." The bar, filled with the usual crowd of disillusioned souls and would-be heroes, offered little comfort but plenty of cover as Rigel outlined their next move. They needed a plan, a real plan, not just snark and bravado wrapped in paper-thin confidence. "We need intel," Ayla said, cutting to the chase. Something that gives us an edge, like a sarcasm bomb, Jax suggested, eyes twinkling mischievously. Funny, Rigel said, but no, we need to hit the Varkniks where it hurts, find out what they care about and use it against them. How do we do that? Deke asked, his fingers twitching like a hyperactive scourge. Intel, Ayla repeated, her tone making it clear she was willing to tattoo the word on someone's forehead if necessary. And for that we need to infiltrate one of their data centers. Infiltrate, Jax echoed, leaning forward with interest. Sounds fun. Yeah, a real barrel of laughs, Rigel said. But if we're gonna do this, we do it smart. No galloping in like idiots asking to be vaporized. Their table fell into a thoughtful, conspiratorial silence, broken only by the occasional curses of a drunkard and the soft swish of drinks being served. The rebellion had never been a well-oiled machine. It was more like a rusting, rattling rattletrap held together by spit and stubbornness. But Rigel felt the familiar flicker of hope ignite, a desperate, foolish hope, but hope all the same. All right, Rigel said, the weight of the moment pressing down on him just enough to make his sarcasm slip. Let's make those Varkniks regret ever trying to squash our human spirit, or at least make them think twice about it. Deke managed a nervous smile, while Ayla nodded, her eyes fierce with determination. Even Jax, usually a master of carefree, looked serious for once, a face Rigel wasn't sure he liked seeing. They left the bar with a new plan in mind, stepping back into the chaos of the spaceport like actors rejoining a play that firmly relied on improvisation. The rebellion might be on its last legs, but it wasn't down for the count. Not yet. There was still a punchline waiting at the end of this cosmic joke, and Rigel was determined to deliver it with style. The Varkniks data center was a fortress of bureaucracy and boredom, tucked neatly behind layers of security that screamed, "Don't touch, you'll die." It was, naturally, the kind of place a sensible person would avoid. So naturally, Rigel found himself standing outside it, feeling about as sensible as a chicken in a Fox convention. The team, such as it was, huddled in an alleyway stinking of refuse and regret. "Remind me again why I agreed to this," Deke asked, clutching his toolkit like a lifeline. "Because you're a glutton for punishment," Jax replied, his grin back in full force. "And also because we need you to hack their systems," Deke grimaced, fingers twitching as if they had a life of their own. "Oh right, that." "Enough chit-chat," Ayla interrupted, her tone brooking no nonsense. "We need to move before the next patrol comes by." As if on cue, a Varknik security patrol ambled past, their movements mechanical and precise, like clockwork with a penchant for genocide. They didn't even glance at the alley, more interested in maintaining their patrol's monotony than discovering rebels. "All right," Rigel said once the coast was clear. "Remember the plan. In and out, no heroics." "Define heroics," Jax quipped, echoing their earlier conversation and earning a glare from Rigel. "Anything involving a snappy one-liner before getting disintegrated," Rigel shot back. "Let's go." They crept toward the entrance, a nondescript door nestled in the side of the building like a secret handshake among spies. Deke's fingers flew over the security panel, his nerves channeling into a focused frenzy of hacking. The others kept watch, eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The door clicked open with a sound of reluctant acquiescence, and they slipped inside, the atmosphere shifting from the chaotic freedom of the spaceport to the sterile, soul-sucking order of the Varkniks. The corridors were pristine, illuminated by harsh lights that seemed to promise both security and surveillance in equal measure. Deke led the way, his familiarity with systems and computers guiding them through the maze of corridors with the ease of someone who'd spent far too much of his life avoiding the real world. They ducked into a side room that housed a terminal, one of many scattered throughout the building like droplets of control in an ocean of data. "All right, let's see what these Varkniks are hiding," Deke said, cracking his knuckles with a confidence that belied his twitchy demeanor. As Deke accessed the terminal, Rigel watched the door, the seconds ticking away with the kind of insistent urgency that always seemed to accompany potential doom. Ayla and Jack stood on either side of the room, ready to respond to any threats, or at least die trying. The sound of typing filled the room, punctuated by Deke's muttered curses as he bypassed security protocols with the deftness of someone who'd spent more time behind a screen than was strictly healthy. Finally, the screen blipped, and the data they sought spilled forth like a bounty of forbidden knowledge. "Got it," Deke announced, grinning as if he'd just won the lottery. All the dirty little secrets they never wanted us to see, any mention of a sarcasm bomb? Jax asked, his tone teasing but his eyes sharp. "Surprisingly, no," Deke replied, shaking his head. "But there's plenty of data on their strategic weaknesses," and the sound of footsteps cut him off, echoing down the corridor with the kind of ominous foreboding that usually preceded disaster. Rigel tensed, exchanging a glance with Ayla that conveyed urgency without words. "Wrap it up," Rigel ordered, his voice low and insistent. "We're out of time." Deke nodded, fingers scrambling to copy the data before they had to make their exit. The footsteps grew louder closer, and Rigel could feel the tension in the air thickening like the prelude to a storm. Just as the footsteps seemed ready to round the corner, the data transfer completed with a triumphant beep. Deke disconnected, and they slipped from the room with the kind of efficiency only desperation could provide. The corridor was empty for the moment, but Rigel knew their luck wouldn't last. The group moved quickly, retracing their steps with the urgency of fugitives who knew their time was running out. As they reached the exit, the alarms blared to life, the sound echoing through the halls with a screech of impending doom. The patrol must have discovered the breach, and now the whole building was coming alive with activity. "Time to go," Rigel shouted, pushing them forward as the sound of pursuit grew louder behind them. They burst through the exit, the cool air of the spaceport a welcome contrast to the sterile atmosphere inside. The crowd would offer cover, but Rigel knew they couldn't stay here. Not now that the Varkniks would be hunting for them with the kind of relentless efficiency only a bureaucratic nightmare could muster. "Back to the safe house," Rigel ordered, leading them through the chaos with the confidence of someone who'd been making things up as he went along for far too long. As they melded into the crowd, Rigel felt the weight of their actions settle over him once more. They'd hit the Varkniks, but it was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come, and Rigel knew they'd have to be ready. For now, though, they had intel, a plan, and the kind of camaraderie that only came from shared danger and mutual sarcasm. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, something was all you needed to keep fighting. As they disappeared into the throng, Rigel couldn't help but smile. The Varkniks might have the upper hand for now, but he had faith in the human spirit, a spirit that was as irreverent, stubborn, and brilliantly chaotic as anything the universe could throw at them. The fight was far from over, but Rigel knew one thing for sure: they weren't going down without a fight. Not now, not ever. The spaceport terminal hummed with the dissonant harmony of travelers, shifting from the mundane to the chaotic with every announcement from the crackling PA system. It was the kind of place Rigel O'Sullivan found both comforting and revolting, like an old friend you can't quite shake off. Today, though, he had bigger problems than stale, recycled air and the smell of cosmic dread. "So what's the plan, genius?" Ayla's sharp voice cut through the din, her blue hair a beacon in the sea of mediocrity. She leaned against the grimy wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in suspicion, or maybe just permanent irritation. "Ah, the magic words," Rigel replied, feigning a grandiose wave as if casting a spell. "We're going to use black holes to send our sarcasm out into the great unknown." Jax, who had been busy trying to balance a glass of dubious liquid on his forehead, perked up. "Black holes? Sounds like a riot. How do we not get sucked into oblivion?" "Preferably by not being idiots," Rigel said, tapping his communicator, a battered relic from a past that wouldn't stay buried. "The Varkniks might think they have us locked down, but they haven't counted on the human knack for bullshitting our way out of trouble. They're about to get a masterclass," Clint Varick added, joining them with the kind of swagger that suggested he believed in his own invincibility. "What's the angle?" Rigel leaned in, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret recipe. "Black holes are nature's disgruntled security guard. They swallow everything up, but they also spit out a little something called Hawking radiation. With a little technical wizardry, we can piggyback our messages on that." Deke, twitchy as ever, was nodding along like a bobblehead on a bumpy road. "So, we're hiding our sarcasm in radiation, like cosmic Trojan horses." "Exactly," Rigel confirmed, his grin as sharp as it was reckless. "And the best part? The Varknik scanners can't pick it up. Too chaotic, too human." Ayla arched an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. "That's diabolical. Diabolically stupid if it doesn't work," Rigel corrected. "But when has that ever stopped us? The plan was simple enough in theory but insane in execution, which naturally made it perfect for their ragtag group. They'd exploit the anomalies on the interplanetary highway, a region notorious for its gravitational hiccups and general disregard for the laws of physics. "All right, team," Rigel announced, glancing around at them. "We're going to dive into this mess head first. If we get it right, the Varkniks won't know what hit them. If we get it wrong, we're toast," Deke finished, his voice a mix of dread and anticipation. "Toasty toast," Jax added, clearly enjoying the potential chaos. They left the terminal with a sense of purpose, or a semblance of it, which was close enough. Their destination was a small, barely used launch bay at the edge of the spaceport, where a rust bucket of a ship awaited them. Calling it a ship was generous. It was more an assemblage of parts held together by desperation and hope, and possibly some duct tape. "Behold," Ayla said with a sarcastic flourish, "the pinnacle of human engineering." "More like an engineering afterthought," Clint corrected, climbing aboard and kicking the console in a loving attempt to coax it to life. The ship grumbled to its senses, the engines wheezing into action like an asthmatic dragon. The interior was cramped, the kind of space that put the cramped in spacecraft, but they made do, squeezing in with the kind of camaraderie that came from shared lunacy. Deke took his place at the console, fingers darting over the controls with the agility of someone who spent more time in virtual worlds than the real one. "All right, setting coordinates for the interplanetary highway." "Hold onto your sarcasm, folks." The ship lurched forward, careening into the blackness of space with all the grace of a drunken swan. Rigel watched the stars blur past, a reminder of their insignificance and potential all wrapped into one chaotic tapestry. "Let's hope this works," Ayla said, her voice a thread of tension in the easy banter. "Hope's about all we have left," Rigel replied, settling into the cold comfort of the cockpit seat. That and a healthy disregard for self-preservation. The journey was mercifully short, the blackness of space giving way to the twisted tendrils of the interplanetary highway, where physics went to get drunk and argue with reality. The ship shuddered as they entered the anomaly-riddled zone, the controls bleeding complaints that Deke ignored with practiced indifference. "All right, let's light this candle," Clint said, cracking his knuckles. "Ready to send our first sarcastic love letter to the Varkniks." Deke nodded, focusing on the task at hand. "Connecting our signal to the radiation bursts now. Let's see if they like a little human wit with their morning coffee." The ship vibrated with the energy of the relay, the makeshift communication system humming with life as it piggybacked their encrypted messages across the vast distances. Rigel watched the readouts, the tension thick as they awaited any sign of success or catastrophic failure. They didn't have to wait long. The console lit up with a series of pings, the kind of triumphant sound that suggested their sarcasm was indeed slipping through the cracks of the Varknik surveillance. "Got it," Deke exclaimed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We're getting replies from our contacts. They're getting the messages. Now we wait to see if the Varkniks notice," Ayla said, her expression a mix of triumph and apprehension. "Or care," Jax added, ever the optimist in a world that didn't cater to such frivolity. For now, though, it seemed they had pulled a fast one on the Varkniks, slipping beneath their radar with all the subtlety of a cosmic prankster. Rigel allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, the kind that came from realizing they'd turned the tide, if only slightly. "Well done, team," Rigel said, his voice tinged with genuine admiration. "Turns out human ingenuity is still good for something." "Yeah," Deke replied, his nervous energy momentarily still. "Let's just hope the Varkniks don't develop a sense of humor. If they do, we'll be the first to welcome them to the club," Clint said, grinning as he leaned back in his chair, the picture of defiance. With their mission accomplished, they set course back to the spaceport, the ship navigating the anomalies with a newfound confidence that belied its ramshackle appearance. As they approached the familiar sprawl of the terminal, Rigel felt the weight of their small victory settle into something like hope. They might be outgunned, outclassed, and on the brink of disaster, but they had one thing the Varkniks could never take away: the indomitable, irreverent human spirit. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and often downright stupid, but it was theirs. And for Rigel O'Sullivan, that was enough. Enough to keep fighting, to keep laughing in the face of impossible odds, and to keep pushing forward with all the reckless abandon of a species that refused to be counted out. As they docked and stepped back into the bustling chaos of the spaceport, Rigel felt the familiar flicker of hope, tinged with a touch of madness. The fight was far from over, but they were in it for the long haul, ready to face whatever cosmic jokes the universe had in store. After all, there was nothing like a little gallows humor to keep the heart beating and the spirit alive, and Rigel was determined to see the punchline through to the end, no matter where it led. The spaceport's terminal buzzed with chaos, a symphony of human and alien discord. Rigel O'Sullivan watched the movement, a steady flow of travelers who, like him, had places to be and trouble to stir. Today, though, his trouble wasn't just personal. It was interstellar. Standing at the entrance of the peace talks, Rigel felt a smirk tug at his lips. The irony was intoxicating. Here he was, about to negotiate with the Varkniks coalition, the same folks who wouldn't recognize sarcasm if it danced on their tentacles. He glanced at his team, who were loitering nearby with the kind of casual disinterest that only came from years of plotting against the universe. "All right, team, time to put on our best we come in peace faces," Rigel announced, adjusting his jacket like it could somehow lend him credibility. "Remember, we're here to confuse and conquer, not get vaporized. Speak for yourself," Ayla muttered, checking her communicator. "I've got a dinner reservation I'd like to keep." "You've got a dinner reservation?" "In this economy?" Jax asked, the glass of dubious liquid now firmly balanced in his hand instead of on his forehead. "Priorities, Jax. If I'm going to go out, I'm doing it with a full stomach." Rigel nodded, the banter a comforting prelude to the chaos ahead. The plan was simple: use their newly established communication trickery to unleash a wave of sarcastic messages, sowing confusion and discord among the Varkniks' ranks. Meanwhile, Rigel would lead the talks, leveraging the chaos as a bargaining chip. "Let's give them a show they won't forget," Clint said, swaggering up to join them. His grin was the kind that suggested he wasn't entirely sure what the definition of a bad idea was, and he didn't care. "We're all set," Deke reported, his voice a nervous staccato. "Sarcasm bombs are primed and ready to deploy at your signal." "Great," Rigel said. "Let's just hope they don't have any sarcasm detectors lying around." With a deep breath that did little to steady his nerves, Rigel marched into the conference room, a sterile expanse filled with representatives from both sides. The Varkniks delegation was as alien as they come, a mix of tentacles, eyes, and inexplicable appendages that made his human form feel woefully inadequate. "Welcome, humans," a voice intoned, resonating through the room like a melancholy thunderstorm. "We hope this meeting will prove mutually beneficial." "Likewise," Rigel replied, flashing what he hoped was a disarming smile. "Let's cut to the chase. We're here for one reason: sarcasm." "Ah, the human weapon," the Varkniks leader observed, their voice tinged with what might have been curiosity or indigestion. "Your sarcasm has caused disturbances. Rigel feigned surprise as he glanced at his communicator, subtly tapping into the sarcasm network Deke was managing. "Funny, we thought you'd appreciate the gesture of humor. We failed to see the humor in your actions. That's the thing about humor," Rigel said. "It's subjective. Kind of like this peace talk." As he spoke, Deke was busy behind the scenes, deploying the sarcasm bombs with all the finesse of a cat burglar. The messages, hidden within the fabric of hawking radiation, were designed to play on the Varknix's weak grasp of human wit. "Let's not beat around the bush," Rigel continued, trying to suppress his amusement as the first reports of Varknix's confusion started trickling in through his communicator. "We're proposing a truce. You ease up on monitoring our every word and we stop being charmingly irreverent. We require assurances," the Varknix leader replied, their tone flat but tinged with an edge that suggested they were more aware of the situation than they let on. "Assurances? We've got plenty of those," Rigel said, adopting a tone of mock sincerity. "For instance, we assure you that humans will always find a way to make a nuisance of themselves." Behind him, Jax cleared his throat, drawing attention to the subtle chaos unfolding on the Varknix side of the table. One alien was gesturing wildly with what could only be described as a tentacle tantrum, clearly confused by the influx of sarcastic messages. "Is there a problem?" Rigel asked, his voice dripping with faux concern. "This is unorthodox," the Varknix leader admitted, a note of frustration seeping into their words. "Your communications are incomprehensible. That's the beauty of sarcasm," Rigel said with a grin. "It's like a fine wine, complex, layered, and often hard to swallow." Outside the conference room, Clint and Ayla were monitoring the situation, ready to step in if things went sideways. "Looks like it's working," Ayla noted, watching the Varknix delegation with a smirk. "Yeah, they're about as comfortable as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs," Clint agreed, his eyes gleaming with amusement. Back in the room, Rigel pressed on, his confidence bolstered by the Varknix's evident disarray. "Let's talk about lifting that ban on sarcasm," he suggested. "We'll tone it down if you stop treating us like wayward children. Your demands are unexpected," the Varknix leader conceded, their gaze shifting to the ongoing chaos amongst their compatriots. "Perhaps a temporary truce could be arranged." "Temporary?" Rigel arched an eyebrow, playing the part of the negotiator to the hilt. "How about indefinite? We'll even throw in the occasional compliment to sweeten the deal." There was a pause, the kind that stretched like an awkward silence at a family reunion. The Varknix leader seemed to weigh their options, the room's tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "Very well," the leader finally said, their resignation echoing through the room. "An indefinite truce, contingent on your restraint." "You're asking a lot," Rigel quipped, unable to resist one last jab, "but I think we can manage it, for now." With the terms set, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The Varknix delegation, though still visibly flustered, seemed to relax. Rigel watched them, feeling a strange mix of triumph and disbelief. Somehow, against the odds, they'd pulled it off. Outside, his team awaited his return, the tension palpable even through the walls. When Rigel emerged, his expression a mask of casual victory, they erupted into a chorus of cheers and sarcastic applause. "Well, look at that," Jax said, clapping Rigel on the back. "You didn't get us all killed." "I owe you a drink. Make it a double," Rigel replied, feeling the adrenaline of victory coursing through his veins. "We just negotiated peace with sarcasm. I'd say that calls for celebration." As they made their way back through the bustling spaceport, the weight of their accomplishment settled in. They'd not only outsmarted the Varknix, no small feat, but they'd done it with the wit and irreverence that defined humanity. "Think they'll actually stick to the truce?" Deke asked, his usual nervousness replaced with cautious optimism. "Who knows?" Rigel shrugged. But for now, we've bought ourselves some time and sarcasm, Ayla added with a grin. Can't forget the sarcasm. With that, they left the terminal behind, the promise of a truce hanging in the air like a defiant banner against a sky of uncertainty. They'd won this round, but the future remained as unpredictable as ever. For Rigel and his crew, though, that was just part of the adventure. As they settled into the spaceport bar, the familiar scent of fermented socks and cheap vodka filling the air, Rigel allowed himself a moment of peace. The universe was vast, dangerous, and filled with creatures who didn't understand humor, but they'd found a way to thrive nonetheless. Here's to us, Rigel said, raising his glass in a toast. And to whatever comes next, to us, they echoed, clinking glasses with the kind of camaraderie that comes from shared battles and improbable victories. For now, at least, they'd carved out a space for themselves in the chaos of the cosmos, proving that even in the darkest corners of the universe, human spirit shone like a beacon. A beacon of sarcastic, irreverent, and defiantly hopeful light. And though the fight was far from over, Rigel knew one thing for certain. They'd face whatever came with a grin, a sarcastic quip, and a determination that was nothing short of quintessentially human. The spaceport bar was a testament to humanity's resilience, or perhaps its stubborn refusal to accept that some places were best avoided. The familiar cocktail of fermented sock and cheap vodka lingered in the air, a reminder that some things never changed, even in the far reaches of the universe. Rigel and his motley crew settled into their usual booth, the worn upholstery a welcome contrast to the cold sterility of the negotiation room. To another day of not getting vaporized, Rigel toasted, raising his glass with a grin that was half triumph, half disbelief. The others followed suit, the clinking of glasses a reassuring sound in their chaotic lives. Crazy to think we actually pulled it off, Ayla mused, taking a sip of her drink, a concoction that defied classification. I mean, sarcasm as a weapon. Who would have thought? Probably the same twisted genius who thought fermented sock was a good idea for a bar theme, Jax replied, his nose wrinkling at the odor but not enough to deter him from taking a swig of his own drink. It's the ambience, Clint said with a shrug, reclining in his seat with the kind of ease that came from knowing you just outsmarted an alien coalition bent on suppressing human expression. Really adds to the whole we don't give a damn vibe, or maybe we're too broke to care is more accurate. Rigel chuckled, the sound a low rumble that settled deep in his chest. The relief of an improbable victory still hummed through his veins, a potent mix of adrenaline and the sweet aftertaste of defiance. He looked around at his crew, each one a picture of irreverent triumph. They'd done the impossible, and damn if he wasn't proud of them. Think the Varkniks will actually stick to the truce? Deke asked, his usual nervous energy tempered by a rare flicker of hope. He fidgeted with his glass, a perpetual motion machine of anxiety. Who knows, Rigel said, leaning back and letting the hard edge of his chair dig into his shoulders. They're a tricky bunch, but then again, so are we. If they try anything, we'll just hit him with more sarcasm, maybe throw in some irony for good measure. Always a solid backup plan, Ayla agreed, her eyes scanning the bar like a hawk eyeing its next meal. And if that fails, there's always the option of running for the hills. Or, the nearest spaceship. Running's good for the heart, Jax added, though his tone suggested he was more interested in the health benefits of sitting and drinking. Or we could just keep doing what we do best, Clint interjected, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never met a bad idea he didn't like. Living on the edge, pissing off intergalactic overlords and making it look easy. Yeah, easy, Rigel echoed, the word rolling off his tongue with a hefty dose of sarcasm. Because nothing says simple like negotiating peace with humor. They lapsed into a comfortable silence, the noise of the bar a familiar backdrop to their thoughts. Rigel found himself reflecting on the past few days, the chaos and uncertainty that had led them here. It was strange to think that, for once, things seemed to be looking up. The interplanetary highway, that fragile thread of diplomacy, was beginning to heal, tentative new alliances forming in the wake of their rebellion. "Word on the grapevine is we're being hailed as heroes," Ayla said, breaking the quiet with a wry smile. "Not every day you get that kind of recognition for being a smartass." "We're heroes?" Deke asked, incredulous. "Does that mean we have to stop with the sarcasm?" "Not a chance," Rigel replied, grinning. "We just get to be sarcastic with a medal now." "Great," Clint said, raising his glass again. "Because nothing says hero like being a professional pain in the ass." "Better than being a professional corpse," Jax interjected, his tone as dry as the deserts of Mars. They all laughed, the sound a welcome release after days of tension and uncertainty. It was good to be alive, and even better to be alive and still able to make jokes about their situation. As the night wore on, the bar filled with the stories and laughter of other patrons, each one a testament to the resilience of humanity in a universe that seemed intent on grinding them down. Rigel watched them, feeling a strange sense of kinship with these strangers. They were all part of something larger, a shared determination to carve out a place for themselves against impossible odds. "Think Clint's gonna get out soon?" Deke asked, his voice low as he glanced around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. "He'd better," Ayla said, her eyes narrowing with determination. "We owe him that much at least." "He's a slippery one," Rigel agreed, his mind drifting to their still imprisoned comrade, probably already plotting his escape as we speak. "I wouldn't be surprised if he's halfway out by the time we get there." "Wouldn't put it past him," Jax said with a nod. "He's got more lives than a cat, and probably just as many bad decisions." "Speaking of bad decisions," Ayla said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, "what do you say we make a quick visit to Clint's cell? See if we can't expedite his release." Rigel considered it, weighing the risks against the benefits. It was a bad idea, fraught with potential pitfalls and the kind of danger that usually ended with someone getting shot. But then again, they'd built their entire rebellion on the foundation of bad ideas and sheer audacity. "Why not?" he said finally, the grin spreading across his face, a mirror of the reckless hope that had carried them this far. "After all, wouldn't want to deprive Clint of the chance to be a hero too." "That's the spirit," Ayla said, her smile sharp and full of mischief. "Let's go spring our fearless leader." With their minds made up and a plan as solid as wet tissue paper, they left the bar and ventured into the depths of the spaceport, their steps echoing with purpose and the promise of more trouble to come. The corridors were a maze of shadows and flickering lights, the hum of machinery, a constant reminder that they were deep in the belly of the beast. Rigel led the way, his instincts honed by years of navigating similar labyrinths in search of freedom and a good drink. "Keep it quiet," he whispered, the words barely audible over the thrum of the spaceport's heartbeat. "Last thing we need is to set off an alarm and have every guard in the place breathing down our necks." "No pressure then," Jax replied, his sarcasm a comforting presence as they moved deeper into the secure section of the port. The route to Clint's cell was one they'd memorized, a series of twists and turns designed to throw off anyone who might try to follow. They'd practiced it a dozen times on the off chance they'd need to make a quick escape, though Rigel had hoped it would never come to that. "Here we are," Deke murmured, stopping in front of a nondescript door that looked like every other in the hallway. "Now what?" "Now," Rigel said, reaching for the control panel with a confidence he didn't entirely feel, "we work some magic." He punched in the code they'd acquired through a mix of bribery and good old-fashioned cheating, the lock disengaging with a soft click. The door slid open, revealing a small cell and the familiar figure of Clint lounging inside like he didn't have a care in the world. "Took you long enough," Clint said, his grin wide and unrepentant as they filed in. "Thought I'd be stuck here forever." "Not on our watch," Ayla replied, her own smile a reflection of the camaraderie that bound them together. "We're busting you out hero style." "Appreciate it," Clint said, standing and stretching with the ease of someone who'd just woken from a long nap. But I was just getting comfortable. Comfort's overrated, Rigel said, clapping him on the shoulder. Besides, the real party's out there, and we can't have it without you. With Clint free and the clock ticking down to their inevitable discovery, they made a hasty retreat, the corridors blurring into a single stretch of potential peril. But as they moved, Rigel couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope beneath the cynicism and sarcasm that had become their trademark. The universe was a vast, uncaring place, but for now, they'd carved out a small corner for themselves. A place where they could be who they were without fear of reprisal or suppression. And as they made their way back to the bar, their laughter and banter echoing through the hallways, Rigel realized that maybe, just maybe, they'd found something worth fighting for after all. "Here's to more bad decisions," Clint said as they settled back into their booth, his glass held high in a toast that was both reckless and sincere. "And to the idiots who make them," Rigel added, the grin on his face a testament to the defiance that burned in his chest. They clinked glasses once more, the sound a promise and a challenge to whatever the universe might throw their way next. For now, they'd won a victory, however small, and that was enough. And if the future held more battles, more chances to prove themselves against impossible odds, they would face them with the same unwavering spirit and irreverent humor that had carried them this far. In the end, it was all they had, and for them, it was more than enough.